that said, it is my pleasure to introduce our lunch speaker, Ben Fargher. Ben is the Managing Director for Sustainability for Cargill Agricultural Supply Chain in North America. In this role, he is responsible for a sustainability portfolio, including carbon and water projects in this part of Cargill's business. Ben is a native of Australia, where he was the general manager for customers, grain origination, and storage and handling in Cargill, Australia's grain and oilseed business. He moved to the United States in 2008 to accept his current position. Please join me in welcoming Ben.
Well, thank you very much, Doug. Appreciate the kind introduction. I hope the technology is working and you can hear me okay. In a moment, I'll share my screen as I'd love the opportunity to share a couple of slides with you. But before that, I did want to not only thank Doug and Sara, but thanks very much for having me today. And I wanted to, with that, acknowledge the Business Council of Kansas City, a place I've had the pleasure of going multiple times now since I've been in the United States, and also want to acknowledge Agri-Pulse as well. Would like to thank the sponsors for their generous contribution today, and also would like to acknowledge Senator Moran and Secretary Vilsack as well. So with that, I'd like to just share my screen. So just bear with me as I get the technology working, if that's okay, everybody. So look, what I wanted to do today is just share some thoughts with you about what Cargill's doing in the sustainability space, including carbon. And I'd like to do that at several levels. Firstly, I just want to talk about, after a quick introduction on Cargill, what we're seeing in this sustainability and new market space, particularly on the demand side of the equation, some of the dynamics around that. I did want to speak about this concept of regenerative agriculture and how we're engaging in this space. And then lastly, and importantly, I think, I wanted to share some thoughts on what we're practically doing on the ground to help our farmer customers, our growers, participate as these markets emerge and grow. And then I'm absolutely, with Sara's help, going to leave time for questions to make sure that it's topical to your to what people in the audience are really interested in knowing more about. So with that, just a little bit about Cargill, and I trust the slide moved there. So we're a global agribusiness, and many people in the room will be aware of the company, of course, but I wanted to put up this slide intentionally when I explained a little bit about the context on sustainability, because we think that because of our place in the supply chain and the fact that we consider our demand customer, our food and CPG customers, as that demand base, but also we view our grower customers, our farmer, our rancher, our grower customers, we're uniquely positioned in the middle, and we can see the demand from our customers and growing, and I'll come to that more specifically in a minute, and we can see the good work our growers are doing around sustainability, have for some time, and will continue to do. And so that place in the supply chain does, we think, mean that we're uniquely positioned, and gives us some insights, some of which I was keen to share with you today. So there's so much discussion, as you'd all be aware in the audience, about sustainability at the moment. And why are we seeing that? Well, of course, we know that there are global climatic challenges at foot. Farmers know that. We've been working with the climate for so long. No one knows more about climatic variables, not just climate variability, but also water scarcity, and the natural system, as well as farmers. But of course, we're seeing heightened awareness, and I should say expectation from consumers about this issue now. And of course, as that manifests itself through our system, you're seeing companies positioning themselves with our consumers, really seeking to meet not just that interest, but that expectation from the consumer base. And we're seeing that not just from purchasing decisions, but of course that feeds right through to the system in terms of shareholders, banks, finances, investment in the sector, right through to everyone really engaged and involved in trying to make a difference here. And companies respond. And I heard a CEO of one of the large companies a couple of weeks ago talk about this and talk about the interest from the younger generation in particular being off the charts when it comes to interest and expectation about sustainability. And he also went on to mention that the rule in his business was never lose the younger generation or the next generation of consumer. And so we're seeing that dynamic. And from that, what we're seeing is companies not just with an interest, not just relating to the expectation of the consumer, but making specific commitments around this area and public commitments about what they're going to do in their sphere of influence to make a contribution to this challenge we face. And so with that, this chart is just a snapshot or representation of some of the commitments we see demand food CPG customers making in this area. It's for illustrative purposes, ladies and gentlemen. I don't intend it to be comprehensive of all the commitments or in any way seek to represent all the commitments the demand customer or the food and CPG sector is making. All I'm doing is, for illustrative purposes with some brands we all know, explaining some of the specific commitments companies have made and more are making. And they're making that on various levels, as you'd all be aware in the audience. Making it based on science-based commitments, making commitments around net zero, what now is being called beyond net zero, around broader sustainability commitments, around water commitments, specifically around regenerative ag commitments. And we're seeing a range of those dynamics and acceleration. And of course, for a company like Cargill, we've got our own corporate commitments as well. And just to explain a little bit about that dynamic, some of you will be very familiar with this language, and I certainly don't intend to bore you with that level of detail, but I did want to give you just a snapshot that a company like Cargill, as part of a broad range of sustainability commitments, does have specific commitments in the area, for example, of our own operations, what's known as Scope 1 and 2 emissions, where we seek, in this case, to reduce that emission profile 10% by 2025 off a 2017 baseline. We have commitments in the Scope 3 area, or along our supply chain, where we seek to reduce the intensity or per tonne of product sold emission profile by 30% to 2030 off a 2017 baseline. We've got commitments around water. We've got broader regenerative agricultural commitments that I'll come to in a minute. It's just an illustrative snapshot of our commitment to this endeavour, but within the broader context of the companies, some of which I've illustrated on the screen. And of course, what's interesting now, and I find this really interesting as someone who's spent my whole career in agriculture, I think that what's interesting is we're seeing the acknowledgement and the interest from people outside our supply chain, outside our ag and food sector, acknowledging that farming and agriculture really is part of the solution, not part of the problem to some of these global environmental challenges. And you'll all have a different perspective on that. And of course, I've got a different perspective coming from a different geography in Australia, as distinct from now having the privilege of learning about Midwestern United States agriculture. But for me, that hasn't always been thus. That hasn't always been us. And for a long time, people would talk to me about the problems of agriculture and how we needed to do something about it, as distinct from the opportunity of agriculture and the fact that you can't do something about it without the people that are actually managing the land and water resource, the farmers and ranchers. And of course, that will be logical to people in this audience. But I'm seeing, and we at Cargill, and I'm sure you will be seeing as well, more and more people outside our supply chain, not with that background, come to that realisation. And that's exciting. That's really, really exciting. And I also think there's an onus of responsibility on companies like Cargill and our sector to position ourselves, to work together, to actually provide the tangible tools, support and advice to our farmer and rancher customers so that we can optimise and maximise that opportunity for the sector we're also passionate about. And so this dynamic and sustainability is just one aspect of where we're seeing that interest around agriculture. I personally find it fascinating. You know, I was explaining to a younger person not from ag the other day about this, and I was so excited about agriculture, and I was excited to talk to them about it. And they said, Ben, it's always been like this. And I said, well, it hasn't always been like this. And obviously everyone's situation is different, as I mentioned before. But for me, when I was passionate about agriculture, I grew up on a farm in Australia. I moved to one of the big cities there to work in agriculture. And I explained to this person, you know, I used to go to a dinner party in that type of environment, and people would go around the room, just as you do when you go to a dinner and you don't know the people there. And as part of the introduction, they'd explain what they did. Everyone from different walks of life, of course. Teachers, plumbers, electricians, doctors. And often at these events, there'd be people in finance, bankers, funds management, technology people, commercial, business people. And then it would come around to me. And people would say, Ben, what do you do? And I'd say, well, I work in agriculture. And you could hear the room go quiet. It was almost as if back then some of the people in that room were thinking, gosh, I'm sorry. That must be tough. There's so many challenges in agriculture. And I'd proudly sit through those dinners, just like the people in this audience, I'm sure, would proudly have done that if you had the same experience. And I'd think, well, I'm passionate about this sector and we're part of the solution. But of course, what I'm finding now is that those dinner parties are different. Because now when people go around the room, still the same subset of people, and it gets to me, and I say I work in agriculture, people say, can we sit next to you? How do we get involved? We're in banking, we want to get involved. We're in funds management, we want to get involved. We work in technology, we want to get involved. We're in business, commercial business, we want to get involved. How do we get involved in the sector? Your sector's where the action's at. And that's been a change over my career. And I think it's an exciting change, but I think it does lead to a real responsibility as well. So with that, and that desire to really work with the people managing the land and water resource, there's a real need to obviously set people up with the tools to be able to participate, not only do what they do well in terms of producing food and producing its sustainability, which is inherent in their nature, but also now to potentially, and as these nascent markets develop, participate in these new environmental markets. And as a result, there's a big discussion around regenerative agriculture, as you know. And we're doing a lot of work in that area. And we're doing a lot of work in that area to explain to people about the benefits of soil health and regenerative agriculture. And we do define it broadly because we don't want to put people in a box. We don't want to brand people in a particular way. And we know that many growers are doing excellent work and might not necessarily define themselves as regenerative farmers. It's a broad definition and term where we can seek to organise our resources and also engage in those good conversations outside our supply chain, as I just mentioned, so to help people understand what we're doing. So we do have a specific commitment to work across 10 million acres or support 10 million acres of regenerative agricultural practices up to 2030 in North America. A couple of other points about it. It goes to the economics on farm. This for us can't be an esoteric concept. It needs to be practical about what the economics are around climate smart, regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture. What are the costs of some of these practices? What's the revenue implications of some of these practices at the level that our customers and growers understand it in terms of gross margin analysis, partial budget analysis. We've recently done some great work, well, they did great work with the Soil Health Institute to really look at, across a subset of growers, across a subset of states, some of those farm practices at the seed, fertiliser, fuel, labour level to do with different practices such as tillage arrangements, cover crops, etc., and look at some of the impact on that. And what you can see is that, yes, it takes time. Yes, it does take time. Yes, there are cost and revenue implications across these things, but you can see the economic benefit that some of these practices are delivering over time. And this, of course, is X environmental payments, X carbon payments. This is about the systems themselves. And if we can have transparent discussions about some of this, because each farm is different, regions, soil types, of course, production systems, crop mix. But if we can have a transparent discussion about this and then look at sensible pathways to get involved in some of these new environmental markets, that's how we think we'll continue to engage our grower customers, not by having an esoteric conversation about some of these concepts. So with that, we have now put a portfolio of programs on the ground in the United States, and they are numerous. I won't go into the detail now. I'm happy to follow up if people are interested in the audience about them. But they relate to soil health programs, agronomic support, cost-sharing arrangements, water programs. We've got innovation partnerships in place like a Soil and Water Outcomes Fund. We've also just last week announced a new program we've been running called Regen Connect, which I'll come to in a second very briefly. But this is an attempt by us to invest in the area, to learn about the area, to listen to our customers, both on the demand side and the grower side, about what's important to them, and really contribute to make a difference, but do it practically by getting programs on the ground. And again, the philosophy or the principle must be to stand alongside our growers if we are genuinely going to make a difference. And I hope you can hear the passion in my voice about that, because I and we certainly believe that it is true. And so lastly then, just a snapshot of practically a program that we have been signing up or contracting growers about, which is really about seeking to pay them for the good work they're doing in soil health and the sequestration of carbon. Doing that by actually making a payment based on what carbon they will be sequestering from practices such as cover crops and tillage arrangements. There's a lot of partnership opportunities in this space. So we've partnered with a company called Regrow, which is in the measurement and verification space, which really links that on-farm practice and data to publicly available data, to some of these predictive models that are very sophisticated now, so that you can get some transparent information into the growers' hands and some scenario planning capability into growers about what they may expect to see. And that has resonated very well with our farmer customers. It's only year one of our program, that particular program. And we seek to, as we scale, take feedback from our initial participants, again, about what they like, and explaining about the models, and explaining also about the agronomic support, the other partnership opportunities we have, particularly in that agronomic area, and also pointing our growers towards potential funding opportunities, including government funding opportunities that may exist and may be able to complement or run concurrently with some of the work we are doing on that. And I know that's a very quick snapshot of that program, and so I do want to put up just some resources on the screen that may help to be able to point people towards more information about that, and also information about the Soil Health Institute work that I mentioned and some of the economics around this, and some of the other programs that we've been running in the United States. So Sarah, with that, that's a brief rundown of some of the activity we're doing, why we're doing it, and some of the principles against which we are undertaking the activity. And certainly appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for having me today, and happy to now and later participate in any questions that people may have.
Thank you, Ben, for that overview. We are we've got just a couple minutes left, and so I haven't seen a question come in yet, but I'd just like you to drill down a little bit, since Missouri was on your map, and we've got a lot of Missouri folks in here. So if someone's interested in participating in your programs, can you give us a kind of a 30,000-foot overview of what kind of information do they need to provide, and do they have their choice of practices that they might implement, and how does that relationship work?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question, Sarah. So let me just go through the practicality of it very, very briefly. And so obviously, again, because of our place in our existing business in our supply chain and with our farmer customers, we have people working with customers on grain origination, risk management, access to new markets, logistics into our assets. And so we sit down with our customers and talk to them about whether they'd be interested in these arrangements. And I say that intentionally, Sarah, because it's not for everybody. It's not for everybody. We're not trying to put people in a box. We're trying to make sure that these programs meet their specific need. Depending on their location and their soil type and their cropping practice and their view of the world, they may or may not be interested. If they are, then, Sarah, we can go through a process with a workflow, to use a better word, where we talk to them about their property location, their field boundaries, their current cropping system, and then looking at practices such as cover crops or tillage arrangements are able to estimate how much carbon, net carbon, will be sequestered as part of that practice change, that new or additional expanded acre practice change. And against that model, and against a payment per tonne for that carbon in year one, our grower customers then know transparently what they're dealing with. And would they like to get involved in this program or not on that scenario planning basis? And if they would, we can then also support them with some agronomic support, either directly or through some of our partners, and then go through the process over that cropping cycle of that estimation then being verified. And what we're doing is we are splitting the payment to our growers half up front and half at the end of that process. So again, it's not only transparent, but we're supporting the grower up front with that. Then, Sarah, over time, you can imagine if that value proposition is strong, transparent, people understand it and it goes well, we will continue to work with our growers in terms of the next cropping cycle and the next cropping cycle and the next cropping cycle. And doing it on a cropping cycle basis also enables us the ability to be able to explain to our growers, again, that information flow from the demand base about what the carbon market might be doing, because it is nascent, what we're seeing and how carbon prices might change over time, so people feel that they can participate as the market develops over time. So that's a quick, Sarah, a very quick snapshot. People will obviously, we know people's field boundaries. They obviously know what crops they've got, what varieties they've got, the soil type. There's a lot of publicly available weather information, and then the sophistication of these models now to be able to make accurate predictions in a transparent way and up front, which then can be in effect trued up over time.
And just two other quick things. What's the term of commitment? And is this open to just landowners or people who might cash rent, which is over 50% in some states in the Midwest?
Yes, so we have put it in place for owners and renters, people managing the land, and it's an annual cropping cycle contract, Sarah.
annual.
And the reason it's an annual cropping cycle is, as I mentioned, because we want to be transparent about how that carbon estimation sequestration model works over time. And we want to walk the journey with our growers over time. And also, because these markets are nascent and developing, we really want to go on that journey in a cropping cycle that makes sense as we continue to try and produce food and participate in these environmental markets at the same time. And so there's different types, as people are well aware, which we haven't had time to get into now, of protocols and carbon market development, low carbon supply chains, insetting type arrangements in agriculture, the development of offset markets in agriculture. And so because it's nascent, and there's multiple pathways and they're developing, we've really set up our program in year one to be able to fit within that and give farmers flexibility to grow with it and learn about it and understand it. And of course, we'll take feedback from them, we'll take feedback from the market, and then we'll set, as we're currently doing now, Sarah, setting up for year two.
Thank you. I'm sorry that we've run out of time. I'm sure there will be lots of questions for you, but thank you for providing a website to go for more information. And so we appreciate your time with us today, Ben, and please let us all join together and show our appreciation for Ben Fargher and Cargill.